Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on football, where today we are just kind of continuing to bask in the glory of this team's week 2 win over the Minnesota Vikings, and then obviously kind of with an eye forward towards the team's week 3 game against the Carolina Panthers, and why things are pointing so up for this team, despite the fact that they're just 1-1. I kind of made the joke on Twitter the other day that it's kind of funny that things are going well for an Atlanta Falcons fan base when it seems like the biggest controversy at this point in time, the biggest argument the fans are having is why they're wasting a practice squad spot on a kicker. Like that, honestly, that is basically the only kind of complaint I've seen from Falcons fans basically since the team Sunday night football win. And we can get into that. Again, it doesn't seem like this week there's any kind of going to be any Younghoe Koo news on that front. Just while since I bring it up, I know he was at practice yesterday. He was not really participating all that much from what we saw. He had kind of a backpack on. He had his cleats on, but he had like a backpack with some things on, just kind of standing around. And like Raheem Morris said on Monday, Parker Romo is going to be this team's kicker, at least 90% likely. Just kind of holding out maybe the 1% chance that things go awry for him this week. But no, Parker Romo is going to be kicking for this team as they head up to Charlotte. And, again, the coup news will happen as it needs to happen, but there's not that big of a rush on doing that. One little piece of, housekeeping to take care of before we just get into just some opinions and things is with regards to the injury situation. I'm not going to get into some of the more injuries that I think are more like literally could change over the course of this week on this podcast in general over the course of the season. I'm not going to talk about those kinds of injuries just because people might be listening to this a day later when the circumstance could have changed. But the one I want to talk about today, obviously, is just AJ Terrell. Obviously, he goes out of that game against Minnesota just before halftime, I believe it was, with a hamstring injury. If you heard the instant reaction that I did after that show or after that game, I was quite concerned about it, just seeing the way that he went down, the fact that he was, on the ground needing treatment on the field before he could get up and walk off under his own power. That to me signaled that it was something relatively significant, and who knows, it could be, but I think with where we stand now on Thursday, as I'm recording this, you got to feel pretty good about the fact that the team has not put him on IR at this point, especially considering the fact that you've got a bye week coming up in a couple weeks. That would be, to me, an opportune time to put him on IR because the player has to miss 4 games regardless if you put him on the short-term IR. So if you have a bye week in there, you're basically getting an extra week of rest for that injury. That would basically obviously be 5 weeks that he would be out, but only 4 games he would be missing. And that could still happen, by the way. The team can always put him on IR at any given point. Like if he doesn't play against Charlotte, they could still put him on IR after the Charlotte game, and that Charlotte game would count retroactively as one of those games missed. So not saying that we're out of the weeds on this yet, but I would say that generally speaking, if we're going to lean one way or the other, I would say it's more of a glass half full notion on AJ Terrell and the significant of his hamstring injury. I know he dealt with a hamstring injury, which I believe he was on the short-term IR for, and I think he just missed the minimum amount of games, if I recall, in 2022. But we'll see on that. And Raheem Morris said, I asked him yesterday at practice, and he said there will be a competition as to, who's going to fill that spot, mentioning all the guys that are on the roster. D. Alford, Clark Phillips, C.J. Henderson off the practice squad, Natron Brooks, who he said they really like as kind of a jack-of-all-trades type of guy who can play on the outside. So if A.J. is not able to play, which it doesn't sound like he will be, he was asked if he's day-to-day, and he kind of went, no, not necessarily, week to week. And that, to me, kind of says that they're probably going to be cautious and at least hold him out of this game, which I think is the smart thing because, as we're going to get into later on, and I think any Falcons fan at this point, I think, is probably agreeing that the Falcons should be going up to Carolina and winning this game. And if they really are going to be a playoff team, this is the type of game that you have to go up and take care of business. And not even just win the game, but it would be comforting for a lot of people to go up there and win that one with relative ease. I saw the line on that game right now is 5.5, which is pretty big by NFL margins, especially for a 1-1 Falcons team. And I think that with some of the things that Carolina is dealing with, the Falcons I think are well set up to go in up there and play the kind of game they want, potentially play their best game of the season. So we'll get into that in a little bit. I did just want to just like spend this podcast just opining on a few things that we heard after hearing from. Again, talked to Raheem Morris yesterday, Zach Robinson, Michael Penix. We heard from Bijan Robinson. We talked to him after practice. And so it was just a good time to kind of take in their words and kind of think about some things and then just offer up some thoughts. And I've been thinking more about, why winning that game against Minnesota in the fashion they did matters, and what I mean by that is I'm talking about offensively speaking. We'll get into the defense in a little bit, but just offensively getting that run game going and not just proving to yourself. I think there was definitely a matter of that, of the team needing to kind of prove it to themselves and responding after playing so poorly in the run game in week 1 at home. So I think that was important for them to show to themselves. But I also have been reflecting on something that Zach Robinson mentioned when he was asked about, and I can't remember if I asked him or somebody else did, about the fact that Penix has not really taken any deep shots so far this year, or certainly not connected on any. He's not connected on a pass longer than 15 yards, a target intended for 15 yards or more down the field. I would say, having said that, caveats, toward the end of that Tampa Bay game, he easily could have connected on 2 of those shots that he put great balls up for, and Casey Washington had the ball knocked away by Antoine Winfield in one of them. And then obviously that one to Terrell Hodge just couldn't get his head turned around in time to locate the ball that would have been a game-winning touchdown. But ultimately, he has not been able to complete on those passes, and if you were to have come into the season knowing that, you probably would have thought the Falcons would be in even worse shape offensively than what they've shown. And instead, they have gone, wire to wire with the Bucs, where Michael Penix still threw for just under 300 yards in that game. And then obviously they get a really convincing week 2 win over the Minnesota Vikings. So not only do they prove it to themselves that they can run the ball, but I think that there's an important note that they proved it to opponents, to other defensive coordinators, that if teams are going to leave 2 high safety shells against them, that gives the Falcons a numerical advantage in the box, especially if after what we talked about on the previous episode with Zach Robinson really leaning into that 12 personnel, they're just going to run the ball down your throat. And they don't care if Michael Penix doesn't have to even take any of those deep shots, as long as they're able to still move the ball down the field through the likes of Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier on the ground. And what we saw in that Minnesota game was not only them able to move the ball on the ground, and therefore, they keep more time in possession when you're moving the ball that way, et cetera, but they're picking it up in chunks. Like Bijan Robinson is the kind of back who can take any carry for 15, 20 yards or more. We saw even, there was kind of funny, and just an example of how special Bijan is and just the reactions that he has. He was able to take a wayward snap from Ryan Newsel on a pass play, a designed pass play. Bijan Robinson steps up into the A gap to take on a blitzer that he was anticipating that was coming, and he just takes the snap away from Michael Penix and runs the ball for, I believe it was like a 2nd and 15 at that point in time, and then creates a 3rd and short for the team. So with players like that, and with what the offensive line was able to bounce back and show in that game, was that you cannot just leave 2 high safeties up against this team for prolonged periods of time. And if you do, you're going to be punished for that. There is a downside to doing that. And it's particularly notable in the modern NFL and the way that we're seeing defensive coordinators kind of trend is to leave those 2 high safety shells and play a lot of that cover 4, the cover 4 match type of stuff that Vic Fangio is really popularizing. And the Falcons are kind of combating that. And that is something that I think that Arthur Smith was picking up on when he was the coach here. And that's why you are generally seeing a lot of these teams go to 12 personnel. The Falcons did not do that last year when a lot of teams were starting to kind of bend towards that side of the curve. Now we are seeing Zach Robinson much more willing to do that. By the way, and I asked Zach Robinson about what gives him that willingness to do it, and obviously what we just said is definitely a part of it. But I have to think that um, Kyle Pitts and the way that he's getting better at knowing the details of the offense and being able to be that allows him to be utilized in different ways in different positions on the field is contributing to Zach Robinson feeling like he has more freedom to change some of these personnel sets to best put the Falcons in position to play the kinds of games that they want to play. So with these, talents that the Falcons have in the run game with regards to the offensive line and the backs that they've got, they can punish teams who play in this kind of style. And then, there's a kind of a correlation here, or not correlation, but a similarity to, just how effective the Falcons can be in the checkdown game, which has been a lot of what this team's offense and the passing offense has been so far this season. Bijan Robinson is actually the team's leading receiver. So he's after week 2, he leads the team in both rushing yards and receiving yards. And a lot of that is down to his explosive 50-yard touchdown catch that he had against Tampa Bay in week 1 on the third play of the season, which was a checkdown play, which was a shot play, actually. We talked to the coaches after that game in the week that followed, and they said that was a shot. Raheem Moore said, yeah, that was a play that was supposed to go for a touchdown. Just it wasn't supposed to go for a touchdown to Bijan. But he's a talented enough back that he can make a check down a touchdown if the defense is not set up properly, or if, as was an example there, he makes a guy miss. He's able to do that. And so defenses have to be able to deal with that threat that Bijan presents, both in the run game and in that short passing game, which we thought, or at least it was something that I was talking about heading into the season, that was the threat that Michael Penix really brings to this offense, which is that we all know he can beat you over the top with his arm, with his strong arm. And if that puts defensive secondaries on their heels, and kind of guarding over the top like they have been so far this season, then that's going to leave so much more space to operate for these backs and some of these short yardage routes underneath, where there's going to, if you can make a guy miss, then you can pick up chunk plays even through that aspect of the game alone. So that's why what the Falcons showed offensively in that Minnesota game matters, even though the passing game did not get going, and it still hasn't really gotten going to the extent that we think it's capable of. We know that it's capable of more. Like, we've seen Michael Penix throw 10 big-time throws in 3 games last year when there was not as much respect for what he was going to be able to step in and do as a passer. And so, imagine what this offense can be when you start to get both of those aspects of the offense going, when Zach Robinson can start better dialing up plays. And, there's been a lot of criticism for him so far this season. I think a lot of it is, it's fair. But I also think, he said it, like, we're still building this thing. That's kind of his phrase. We're building this thing. But no, I think that he's still, figuring out the flow, the kind of the play calling flow of, getting these guys in the best positions to succeed and do as much damage as possible. And, he hasn't been perfect, but I have a lot of confidence based on what the Falcons were able to do toward the end of last season offensively, that they will get this thing going and flowing in a better way. And that what we are seeing so far this season is just kind of the natural early season progressions of getting an offense rolling. And as you get more tape, you get more predictability about what defenses are going to present, both in their coverages and their personnel units. Then the Falcons can hopefully start to take advantage of that more and more as the season progresses. So right now it's just about, doing what you can to pick up wins, to do what you need to do to win games. And, but I have confidence that this offense is going to flow, is going to start to continue to progress and get better. And that's really, really exciting for what they can potentially be. It's also worth noting, I've been checking out, some of the stuff that a guy named Ben Baldwin has been posting on X. I should probably get his exact handle, and I don't know if I have it on me. I'm sure if you just search Ben Baldwin, I think it's like Cowboy Baldwin or something. Anyway, he's a kind of a stat nerd type of guy, and he posts lots of interesting charts and things with regards to different aspects of football. And he's been posting some stuff recently about the pass protection rankings for all the teams in the NFL, and the Falcons basically ranked 6th on his kind of composite rankings. Again, this is pass protection only. They're also pretty similar in the run game. Obviously, brought up significantly after this week against Minnesota. And this is kind of a metric that he basically compiles himself. That's taken from some ESPN stats, some PFF grades, which should be taken with a grain of salt. But that's why I like the way that he does it, because it doesn't just rely on the PFF grades or this unit, or this stat, this metric. It combines things, he weights them, and then he comes up with his own numbers. So he has the Falcons 6th, and I think that goes to show that with Elijah Wilkinson stepping into Caleb McGarry's role, the Falcons haven't really been any worse in pass protection to this point. And in fact, I shouldn't say in fact, but I think you can surmise that potentially they're even better in pass protection than they would have been with Caleb McGarry. I think you can make the argument that Elijah Wilkinson actually makes them a little bit better in pass protection versus what they would have gotten with Caleb McGarry. Now, obviously, clearly worse in the run game. There's no doubt about that. But as long as they can make the run game work in other ways, and again, using 12 personnel, using the tight end in different ways, we saw different kinds of shifts and alignments that the tight end had in this game, being used more like an H-back against Minnesota, which is interesting. If you can start to do that to give yourself that edge in the run game where you didn't previously have it, now that McGarry's out, that's going to give you a big advantage, and potentially make the offensive line unit like even better, honestly, because you are being able to add some versatility while getting that better pass protector in Elijah Wilkinson, which that's debatable whether he is actually the better pass protector than Caleb McGarry, but I think there's you can make that argument. Last thing on the note on the offense, and I put this out there on Twitter yesterday, is that Michael Penix is the only quarterback in the NFL so far this season who has started and completed both of the games, who has yet to commit a turnover-worthy play, which I think is interesting, considering the fact, especially that Michael Penix is a quarterback that wants to push the ball downfield, that we know likes to do that, is good at doing that. And whenever you do that, that's going to lead to more turnover-worthy plays. It's just the other side of that knife. And he has not done that so far this season through 2 games. And Zach Robinson was really commending him on his willingness to, I was going to say ability to take the shot. Like, there is, I think, some, like, you have to have the confidence in you and in your offense that you can take the checkdowns, that you don't have to force the shot plays. Zach Robinson said the mantra they have is like, shot calling does not mean shot taken. And, they have called shot plays for them, but Michael Penix has opted not to do that because of what we were talking about earlier, with these defenses really guarding over the top, which Zach Robinson said has surprised him, especially in the Minnesota game. He thought that later on in that game when Minnesota was down, he thought that they were going to be more urgent in trying to get the ball back and stopping the Falcons from just being able to run the rock. And instead, they stayed in that high shell, and Michael Penix was happy to take what was given to him underneath. And some of those underneath throws turn into some significant gains. Kyle Pitts catches a slant for significant yardage early in that game. Later on in that game, Drake London catches a short slant on a 1st and 20 and takes it for a first down. So even some of these underneath stuff, like we were talking about with that Bijan play that went for 50 yards on the 3rd play of the game, even those underneath throws can turn into significant gains for the offense if that's what the defense is giving you. It's still a positive play. And Zach Robinson's been really, really commendable towards Michael Penix in just his judgment on when or when not to take some of those shots. And, so far the shots have not been there for him, so he's not forcing it in, which is great to see. It's also worth noting that he doesn't have a big-time throw either in these 2 games, where he had 10 of them in 3 games. And that, to me, speaks of, like, I don't really care that he hasn't had to, as long as he's shown it in the past that he's obviously got the arm talent to make those throws. And I don't think there's any doubt that he's got the ability to squeeze the ball into some tight windows and to just make some really impressive throws down the field. And then, so let's get into the defense a little bit. I think things set up really well for this Falcons defense, and we'll talk about it more on the last show of the week when we kind of preview the game a little bit, talk about the matchups. But Carolina is going to be without a couple more of their offensive linemen this week, who both hit IR for what looks like it's going to be a long time. One of them, at least, is going to be out for almost, if not the entire season. The other could be out for a significant chunk as well. But regardless, Both of them are guaranteed to miss this game. And that makes the third week in a row that the Falcons will be going up against an offensive line that is, shuffling pieces around. And listen, I'm not trying to take away from the Falcons defense because the Falcons themselves are shuffling pieces around. And in general, it's pretty rare to be going up against NFL offensive line that is just kind of fully locked and loaded with all their planned starters. Those guys get hurt quite often. I believe that the Commanders are also dealing with some injuries on that front. So, it's not taking anything away, but it's just great news for the Falcons and their pass rush that there's going to be opportunities for them to once again create havoc, get into that backfield, execute that attack style front that Nate Ollie has been implementing with this group, and cause a lot of problems for Bryce Young and that Carolina offense. And I think that, I want to talk about kind of the quantitative versus qualitative takeaways that we see from this defense. And this is kind of going back to science class when you talk about the quantitative and qualitative, but to kind of refresh everybody's memories here, the quantitative is what you can measure, right? Like in science, it's like the quantitative statistics or measurements are, the yards, basically like a lot of the numbers that we dug into on the previous game. That's the quantitative analysis of where this team sits. And then there's the qualitative. That is just the subjective, like kind of the opinion that you form when you watch the team play and just how you perceive the players to be. And that's what really struck me when I was rewatching this team's film on the defensive side of the football, which is just the sheer physicality that they're playing with up front and the aggressiveness. Like it pops off the tape, especially when we're so familiar with, I don't know about you guys, but like I watched all these games back last year and you just don't see that physicality being imposed last year as opposed to this year. Even against that Minnesota game, you can see the line of scrimmage getting knocked back. You can see the pocket collapsing rather quickly around J.J. McCarthy when he's dropping back to pass. You see that kind of chaotic nature that Nate Ollie wants opponents to have to deal with Falcons defensive linemen getting into the backfield and just trying to make that picture a mess. And I think that is a large part of what's giving this team its success so far. And they have not really been punished for it, which is great to see. I was a little bit worried heading into the season that, it's a great game to talk, right? When you talk about having an attack style front and getting into the backfield and making it a chaotic picture and getting in the backfield and doing all that kind of stuff. But I always kind of had this notion that, you do that and you're going to get gashed. And I'm not saying that they haven't gotten gashed this season. We saw the Justin Jefferson big catch that basically gave up a field goal that they probably shouldn't have given up toward the end of that first half in the game Sunday night when Minnesota, I believe, had the ball inside their own 20 with just less than a minute left, less than 15 seconds left. And then one big play, they get a field goal right before halftime that makes it a field goal game with Minnesota receiving, by the way, in that second half. So you do get gashed there. You do get gashed by Tampa Bay on these passes to Emeka Egbuka, both of them really. But it's worth noting, like on at least one of them, that first Emeka Egbuka touchdown catch, like Xavier Watts was right there and could very well make that play. And maybe on another day he does make that play. And I just generally think that the Falcons, that's a gamble the Falcons are willing to take. Like that's the situation they want to set their defensive players up in. And hopefully over the course of the season, I mean, that was Xavier Watts' first NFL game. Since then, we've seen him come away with an interception. We've seen Billy Bowman undercut a route and come away with an interception. Nearly came away with two of them. I think it's exciting to think about what this Falcons defense can be when these playmakers on defense show that they're actually capable of stepping up and making those plays. I think it's something that the Falcons have not really had, at least since I've been covering them for the last several years. So it's really exciting to see. It's exciting to see what this defense can become. And it's just fun to watch, too. That's the other thing, is that when you play this style, it's just fun, It's fun to see your team get sacks and pressure the quarterback and stop runners for a loss, even if you give up a chunk run or two here or there. But it's great. And then the other thing about, like, if the defense can play at this level, which, as we were talking about on the previous show, They're basically a top 5 defense at this point in time. Not saying they're going to finish that, not saying that that's an accurate reflection of where they'll stand at the end of the season, but it is what they've done through 2 games. And if you can play to that level, you give your team a chance to win every single game you play. And I think that that's something that the Falcons have not had, again, since I've been covering them. Since I've been covering them, there's been some games where you have to accept that you are going to give up 30 points in this game, and you're going to have to win a shootout. That's frankly how the Commanders game felt last year when they went up there toward the end of the year, and they nearly did win that game. They nearly did score the amount of points that they needed to win. But I think now it's interesting. I mentioned the Commanders because they'll be playing the Commanders here in 2 weeks, and I think that'll be a great litmus test for where this team is at. In fact, ahead of the season, I was talking about the fact that I thought that the 2 litmus test games for this team were right around the bye. The Washington game right before Week 5, and then the Week 6 game against Buffalo. The reason being, those 2 teams have rushing quarterbacks that are going to keep the team, their quarterbacks are going to give their team chances to win every single game as well. And so that's a great test for this new athletic, dynamic, young defensive group that the Falcons have as to how they're going to be able to deal with specifically those types of quarterbacks that are mobile, dynamic, can beat you with their arm and their legs. And will be very interesting to see. And I guess, Bryce Young is also a version of that, but he's a much less version of that. And frankly, this is a game that you should be expecting to be winning if you're the Falcons, and you do consider yourself a top team in the NFL, or at least a playoff team in the NFL that thinks that it can win this NFC South, which looks like it's going to be a battle because the Tampa Bay Bucs look like they are everything that a lot of analysts saying they were going to be heading into the season. So I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's getting loud outside, so I'm going to go on ahead and get out of here. We'll talk more about the matchups coming up for the last episode of the week as we head into Week 3, as the Falcons get ready to head up to Charlotte to play the Carolina Panthers. We'll talk to you then.